I saw people's relationship with God just be devastated, where now they really almost seem to think that God is a monster. I remember distinctly, I came home with tears in my eyes, and I just thought to myself, what have I become? How it's just, it can be very convicting when someone treats you with great kindness and forgiveness. And then I started to realize, well, no, we actually have to have the confidence and the courage and the freedom to be able to say things like, if God was like this, he would be evil. On Saturday, the 8th of November, I was ordained as a priest in the Church of Confessing Anglicans of New Zealand. That's the GAFCON-affiliated Anglican church here in New Zealand that I've been a part of since 2021. And then on Sunday, the 9th of November, I presided over Holy Communion for the first time, which was, of course, an incredibly powerful and wonderful experience. And I thank God for giving me this calling, for all of the people in my life who he has used to encourage me and support me, to guide me, to convict me, to change me on this journey. It's a journey that, of course, started for me in the mainstream Anglican church. I made a video about that 2 years ago when I was ordained a deacon, and now here it is. I'm now a priest. So I thank God so much for that. And I do ask for people watching this video that you would keep me in your prayers, that you would pray that I would finish the race well after a lifetime of ministry, that I won't let God down, that I won't let the people down that he has appointed me to serve, and that my ministry will indeed give glory to his name. So what now? Well, I've been the curate at St. Timothy's Anglican Church, and now that I'm a priest there, we're going to be doing communion there every week. And so that's still going to go on as normal, and YouTube as well, of course. I'm still going to be putting out videos on the channel. So in terms of what my life looks like, in terms of what I dedicate my time to, there aren't any big changes. But what I did last time when I was ordained a deacon, I put out a video, is I talked a little bit about what sort of changed in my life and in my thinking during that journey to being ordained a deacon. And I figured, well, now that I'm ordained a priest, this would be a good opportunity to talk a little bit about things that have happened in my life that have changed my thinking, changed my character over the last 2 years. Now, people on YouTube don't normally talk about their personal lives, and I understand why. And people are worried that maybe if they talk about their personal lives, it might come across as vain or something. But I actually don't like that people on YouTube don't talk very often about who they are, about their personal lives. And I actually said so in the video I made about the problems with denominational apologetics. One of the problems with people not talking much about who they are is that we, the viewers, don't really get any kind of sense about who these people are. And these are people who are making hours and hours of content about theology, about who God is, how to serve him, how to glorify him. And for some of them, we just don't know who they are. And I actually think there's a problem with that, because it might give the impression that our personal lives and our characters don't have any bearing on our theology, on our beliefs, which is not true. And it's just important, I think, to get a sense of who people are. So I'm perfectly happy to talk a little bit in this video about my personal life. It's not something that I would do very often, but I figured since I'm ordained a priest, now would be a good time. And it might help people to understand some of the reasons why I've changed in my thinking over the past 2 years, which viewers who watch a lot of my videos have obviously seen that there has been some changes. So this might help give some context to that. So the first thing to say is that since I was ordained a deacon, my second son, Atticus, was born. And what that has done is it's grown my heart. You know, your heart isn't like a glass of water where it can be filled up. And if you meet a new person who you love, it gets closer and closer to the edge. And once you reach the edge, you can't love anyone else anymore, or something like that. The heart is more like a balloon. The more people you love and the more deeply you love, it actually just expands your heart. And that's definitely been true. Ever since my second child has been born, I have felt my heart grow. I now have a 4-year-old son and a 1-year-old son. And I think people who are parents who are watching this will know how much being a parent grows your heart, grows your capacity to love. And even the things like seeing my wife now as a mother of two children, my love for her grows. It just increases my love. And being a parent does make one see the world in a whole new way, doesn't it? It makes you appreciate how precious and how sacred life inherently is, every life. And it also just changes you when you become so responsible for someone, for someone's life, and you love them so deeply that you would, you'd rather be damned than that they should be lost. And so that just has inherent changes, I think, having a second child born, seeing my first child, Basil, grow into this adorable toddler who has his own personality, who you can have conversations with. That's changed me as it changes everyone who's had children. The other thing that's happened is just friendships that I already had have deepened. I felt over the last 2 years, I felt myself becoming closer to my closest friends. I've also seen a lot of suffering, though, amongst friends and family over the last 2 years. I have been to multiple funerals, for instance. I even led my first funeral. And because of the suffering that I've seen and experienced over the last 2 years, it has led to questions in my mind, questions that needed answers, that needed deep reflection. We'll get to that a little bit more later. And then with these deepened friendships, there's discussions that we have about those questions. And so a lot of what other people believe has impacted me as well. And the questions that other people have raised and the answers that people I love have given has encouraged me to think about different perspectives and to try and resolve those problems. Now, I must say that another thing to mention here with my personal life and how this has impacted me is some negative things that have happened over the last 2 years in terms of my personal life. And what I'm referring to is, I would say, betrayal. I have had friendships break down over the last 2 years, and I've had people who I looked up to, who I respected, who I considered to be friends, stab me in the back or cut off the friendship. And that has led to a shifting of the people who have the most influence over me. So, for instance, I had friends tell me to leave the church I'm in, the Church of Confessing Anglicans, due to the fact that my church does, unfortunately, ordain women. This is something that I have been outspoken against. I remain so. I disagree with that practice. However, I don't think that it is bad enough to warrant leaving that church. It's certainly not bad enough to warrant being an independent church. And so I've actually had friends who would semi-regularly try and encourage me to leave the CCA entirely and be an independent pastor of an independent church with no bishop above me. The interesting thing is that almost all of those people have ended up cutting me off as a friend and in some cases actually betraying me. And we'll get to some of that later. Over ridiculous differences, political differences, really. And one of them even ended up being booted out of the micro-denomination that he was in and proving to be someone who really does attack anyone who disagrees with him on the slightest issue and who slandered me online over a political disagreement and ignored multiple messages I sent him asking for us to talk our differences over and have dialogue. He ignored them and still did what he did. Now, what happens when something like that happens? It shifts who influences you, and it makes you see the things that they're saying in different perspective. And look, experience shouldn't count for everything, of course, but it simply does matter. And I think that it is wrong and it's unwise to act like it doesn't matter, to act like the only thing that should impact or does in reality impact one's beliefs is simply like the books they read and the thought processes they have, divorced from emotion and divorced from experience. That's just not true. We are embodied creatures. We are relational creatures. We live lives with friends and family and, unfortunately, enemies. And that does change you. And that's partly why I'm making this video, is to sort of try and ground people back into reality a little bit and say, yeah, experience does matter. Reality does matter. Your life matters. It's not the most important thing, of course. Truth is truth, but it matters. And, I've had hardline conservative friends who are super based on everything turn out to be quite bad people. And I've also had liberal friends who've done that as well, but it simply does impact your thinking when you see the sorts of people who do these sorts of things. And then you see people who turn out to be great friends. And that has led, as I said, to a shifting in who in my life exerts the most intellectual influence over me. But I don't want to act like I myself have been innocent of some of these things. And in fact, the plot twist is I've been guilty of acting this way myself. And that leads to another thing that happened that has been quite powerful. There's someone I know who I've been friends with for 6 years. And I started to really drift away from them in terms of disagreement over politics, disagreement over theology. And I never talked to them about those disagreements at all. And one day I blocked them because I felt that they were just so wrong. And I didn't see them or hear from them for about a year. And then over the summer, I got a summer job just so I could earn some more cash working at a warehouse. And by sheer coincidence, because this person lives in a completely different part of the city, they live about an hour's drive from me. I show up to work at this warehouse, and sure enough, they're there too. Again, total coincidence. Well, the first few days, I have to say I ignored them. And then there was one too many instances where we crossed paths in the warehouse. And there was one point where we crossed paths and it was sort of unavoidable. Made eye contact, and then I think I just laughed, and this person laughed too and said, look, I'm not avoiding you. I've got no problem with you. I just, and I said, yeah, well, obviously, I blocked you. I've been avoiding you. And they were like, yeah, I understand that. But I'm fine with that. I understand. And then we got to talking, and it was just like, they didn't hold it against me at all. And, we're perfectly happy to go back to being friends. And then the thing is that there was something around that time that I actually needed some support with. And they found out about it. And they offered to do it on their own entirely. And I was shocked because, this is just right after I'd blocked them and cut them off. Now they're offering to actually do me a very big favor. And I said, are you sure? And they just replied saying, yeah, I'll do anything for my friends. And after that, I remember distinctly, I came home with tears in my eyes, and I just thought to myself, what have I become? How it can be very convicting when someone treats you with great kindness and forgiveness. It can convict people when you're harsh, when you're straight up, when you're blunt. But I actually find that the most convicting thing you can sometimes do is to show someone radical kindness or radical forgiveness. The New Testament talks about this, doesn't it? It's responding to hatred with love, turning the other cheek. That can be so convicting. And it was in this instance. And I realized that I've been acting like these other people in my life who'd hurt me. And this is how they responded. And you see, that does shift one's perspective a little bit when you see someone like this treating you in such a Christian way. And then you see people who are kind of egging you on to go in another direction, treating you in such a terrible way. That does matter. And I think it is unwise, spiritually unwise, to discount experience, discount those things, because that's reality. If you only ever had your beliefs or your views shaped by books you read, YouTube videos you watch, or something, you always run the risk of going down a rabbit hole or sort of having a placebo effect or just being divorced from reality. Because especially with something like theology, there's not a lot of evidence that can decisively prove one thing or another. A lot of it is rather speculative. It's very intellectual. But experience is grounded. It's showing you people who think this way do these things. People who think this way do these things. It's not always the case, of course, but you can see that. So that matters, and it's worth thinking about. At the very least, what it did is it just made me recognize, I think above all, the main way this changed me is it made me recognize that what matters more than having the right beliefs is the content of your character. That's very, very important. The content of your character is more important than having all of the right beliefs. Okay? And that's been very convicting for me, because I am someone who tries to be right about everything, and I see myself as being right on a number of controversial issues where I'm certainly in the very slim minority. And it's convicting to be shown that while that's good and important, the content of your character matters more. And is the content of my character okay, or is there room for improvement? And obviously there is, and I'm still working on that. So that has been, some things has happened over the last 2 years that have changed me. I think it's just made me want to be more loving, want to be more compassionate. And I've seen some of the downsides of certain ideologies. I've seen people who are all into the trad stuff, into patriarchalism, having a trad wife and that sort of thing. And I've seen people like that turn out to really just be misogynists. And I don't want to say too much about it, but turn out to maybe those beliefs were actually not coming from a place of honesty, but were coming out of a place of a sinful impulse, a dark place. You see that. Things like that. Moving out of my personal life into events that have taken place in the world that have changed my thinking over the last 2 years. Well, one that's quite well known, I suppose, if you've watched a lot of my recent videos, is, I would say, about a year and a half ago, I started to become disillusioned with the online apologetics scene, and that disillusionment has only increased as time has gone on. There was a time when I wanted to break into that scene. I felt like I've always really been on the peripheral. I've made videos about Anglicanism. I hadn't made so many videos in opposition to things like Roman Catholicism, but I dipped my toe in that, and I made a decision that I kind of wanted to get involved in that stuff and into debates and those things. But almost as soon as I decided to do that, I became very disillusioned. Disillusioned with the constant debates that take place, the constant fighting that just never ends. How many videos need to be made about why sola scriptura is wrong? I mean, how many videos need to be made about defending sola scriptura? It just goes on and on and on, and it just becomes tiring, it becomes boring. But also the main thing is seeing the effects of ecclesial anxiety and starting to realize that it's an epidemic. People in my personal life, I started to see be devastated by ecclesial anxiety, including a few people who actually left Christianity entirely due to their ecclesial anxiety. These are people who started off well. They may have started off in, a non-denominational evangelical church, and they had a healthy spirituality. They loved Jesus and so on and so forth. Their theology was immature. Okay, they get into YouTube. They start discovering more deep end theological issues. They then realize there's all these denominations. They realize that Roman Catholics are more reasonable than maybe they were led to think, and they start watching all that, And then next thing you know, they are riddled with ecclesial anxiety. Am I in an apostate church? Am I bound for eternal conscious torment? And they can't figure it out. They get seized with paralysis. They, are they right? Are they right? Are they right? Everyone's making cogent arguments. They can't possibly figure out who's in the right. And eventually they just leave Christianity. So I saw that happen. I saw people's relationship with God just be devastated, where now they really almost seem to think that God is a monster who will torture you in hell forever because you weren't correct about which dork on YouTube had the best arguments. So it's ridiculous stuff like that. And people actually think this, and you're seeing it. And then I also was coming across people who were actually interested in Christianity. They were pursuing it, and because of what they were seeing online, the constant fighting, and because they were seeing these guys are saying this denomination cannot possibly be correct, and these guys are saying, well, this tradition cannot possibly be true, they just end up thinking, well, then Christianity can't possibly be true, and they back out and they never end up becoming a Christian. So I was seeing this happen a lot. And as I'm seeing its effect on other people, I myself am becoming disillusioned, and I'm just starting to cringe at how ridiculous and dorky and stupid and pedantic it all is. And I just become disillusioned with it. Really disillusioned with it. I back out. You may have noticed there was a period of time where I barely made anything on YouTube. I may have uploaded the odd sermon, but I basically just went dark because I was just so over it. And then, of course, I made a video about the problem of denominational apologetics, and I made a video about responding to ecclesial anxiety. And so those videos were coming out of this disillusionment that I still feel. And it led to me trying to think about the future of this channel and the sort of videos that I want to make. Look, I'm still going to make, I've got the odd video about like the Anglican view of X. I think those videos are helpful. But even if you make a video that seems innocent enough, even if I made a video simply called Why I'm Still an Anglican, or Why I'm a Protestant, or on a little bit more of a critical level, a video like Why I'm Not a Roman Catholic, or Why I'm Not a Baptist. Even if in that video you're perfectly reasonable, you're not attacking anyone, you're simply just stating why you are this or why you're not that, you might think that's innocent enough. I started to realize that even videos like that actually have a detrimental effect on many people, because it's just one more thing that leads to confusion for them. Let's say they watch a video by some geek called Why I'm a Roman Catholic. And they're like, oh, that makes sense. Those are good reasons to become a Roman Catholic. And so now they're starting to think maybe that's the way to go. But then they see another video, Why I'm Not a Roman Catholic. And they watch that video and they're like, oh, okay, well, actually, yeah, they make some pretty good reasons why not to be a Roman Catholic. What happens now? Confusion happens now. Now they're like, do I, don't I? Then a video pops up, Why I'm a Lutheran. And they watch that video. Oh, okay, those are some good reasons to be a Lutheran. Another video pops up, Why I'm not a Lutheran. And they watch that video. Oh, well, maybe I shouldn't be a Lutheran. And then it starts. The paralysis starts. And I know a lot of people have this paralysis. People who don't go to church anymore, even though they're still a Christian, because they're like, I just don't know what church to join. Every church makes good arguments. And you're just thinking, what is going on here? And you might want to say, well, just join just pick one and join a church and maybe deal with it later. But they're seized by this fear that God is going to eternally, consciously torment them if they join the wrong church. And there are YouTubers who actually do play into this, who actually do say things like, all people who believe in X are going to burn in hell forever. And there are people who don't say that, but it's still kind of an implication of what they're saying. If they're saying things like this denomination is gravely wrong or terribly wrong or whatever, you simply are, even if unintentionally, implying to a lot of people that if they were to join that church or believe this thing, that there could be dire consequences, especially since a lot of these people on YouTube believe in things like eternal conscious torment. And so they actually think plausibly, they would have to think there are some people being tortured forever consciously because they were incorrect about what denomination to join. If you're going to say there's no one at all ever who had that punishment because they were wrong, then you start to wonder, well, then what's the point? Because surely that is an implication of their thought. And so that actually freaks people out. And so the other thing that happened, the other thing that made me disillusioned is I started to think about, what are these people? What is the YouTube apologetics scene implying about God? How is he implicitly being portrayed? And really, he's being portrayed as someone who has created a test that is impossible to resolve, right? That you would require multiple PhDs to be able to have the answer to it. I mean, you look at some of these debates particularly between Roman Catholics and Eastern Orthodox people, and the things they're debating about, these really obscure historical points, these really deep-end theological disagreements that a lot of people just didn't even know ever existed, didn't even realize that there was even something you could disagree about. And they're having these debates, and some 22-year-old guy is expected to watch all that and be like, oh, yep, these guys are right. No, it's impossible to sort out. And the implication is that despite that, if you get it wrong, if you become a Lutheran rather than a Roman Catholic, well, no, you're cooked. God's going to torture you forever. What is this saying about God? It's saying that he's a monster. It is. People don't get a bit freaked out by that. That makes them uncomfortable. How could you ever say that? And then I started to realize, well, no, we actually have to have the confidence and the courage and the freedom to be able to say things like, if God was like this, he would be evil or unworthy of believing in. Otherwise, at that point, do you have faith if you're not willing to say that? As Christians, we believe that God isn't arbitrary. We believe that he actually has a definable character that has been demonstrated to us through the incarnation of his son, Jesus Christ. God is like this, and he's not like that. God's love, which is central to who he is, God is love. God is a holy trinity of persons, the Father and Son who love each other, and their love is manifested in the Holy Spirit that they both share. God is love, and his love looks a certain way. It is demonstrated in a certain way. It is defined in a certain way. The New Testament is very clear about this. God so loved the world, which means this is how God loved the world. He sent his son to save people. God's love is manifested to us in that he sent his son to die for us. God shows his love for us, and that while we were still enemies, his son died for us, so on and so forth. This goes on all the time. God's love looks a certain way. God is a certain way. And so, yes, we absolutely can say, if God decided to not save anyone, if Jesus thought that he was above and beyond wanting to save us or die for us, and he would rather see every single person made in his image be lost forever than that he should die for us, we can say, well, that's not the God I believe in, and that God wouldn't be worthy of believing in. Because in Philippians 2, it says, because Jesus was obedient to the point of death, therefore, at the name of Jesus, every tongue will confess that he's Lord. Because we worship him in response to what he's done. God loved us first, right? And so, yeah, you can actually say about incorrect versions or ideas of God that those aren't worthy of belief, because I actually believe in this God. I don't believe in that God. So that's okay. It shouldn't bother you. And you might say, well, what if you're wrong? What if God actually is like that? Well, then do you have faith? Do you have faith if you are holding out some space in your mind for the possibility that actually God might be completely different to what you think? And we better not say that if God is like this, he'd be evil, just in case he actually is like that. Well, I'm not playing this game of, well, let's be careful just in case I'm wrong. I don't think I am wrong. I'm utterly convinced that God is real and that he is a certain way. I don't hold out room for other possibilities. Of course, I'm not saying that I understand God perfectly. There is wriggle room, but I certainly don't think that God is like how YouTube apologetics implies he is. This, he's like Jigsaw from the Saw series. He's giving you some ridiculous maze you have to wade yourself through. Otherwise, you're going to end up in his eternal torture chamber. That's not real. That's not God. That's not who we're seeing in the New Testament. So I'm being disillusioned. And as I'm thinking through these things, it's raising other questions in my mind. So all this is happening. I think the last thing to say about stuff that's sort of happened outside of my personal life that's affected my thinking is this horrible genocide that took place in Gaza. And what happened was just seeing the response to it from Zionist Christians, from your standard conservative Christian. You know what I mean? That sort of Republican, conservative type Christian, particularly of a certain generation where they all feel like it's just part and parcel of Christianity is to support the state of Israel for some reason. And seeing their sickening response to it. Now, not everyone I know who supports Israel is sickening. Let's just make that clear, all right? I know some people who have a sincere support for the state of Israel, and I think that they're just duped because they really, truly don't believe that Israel has done the things that they obviously have done. They really think it. And so they're just duped. They're just propagandized by the Israeli, paid for media. And, you can forgive them for that to a degree. To a degree. They're intelligent people. They should probably know better. But you can forgive them for that. But there are people I know, including some of the people who turned out to refuse any dialogue with me and slander me and cut me off as a friend, who basically acknowledge that Israel has done what we all know they did. That is that they have killed tens of thousands of civilians. They have killed tens of thousands of children, that they've blown children and babies to pieces in front of their mothers, that they have done this and defend it. And defend it. And in some cases, joke about it. Joke about it. You got people like Jordan Peterson, this psychopathic freak. He's like, give him hell. Give him hell? Yeah, right. I start seeing this a lot. And that bothers me. That bothers me a lot when you're seeing Christians act in a certain way. And I got to tell you, another thing that happens is I started seeing a lot of people defend what was taking place in Gaza. And not just Gaza, but also what's going on the West Bank. And even things like the pager attack in Lebanon, where children are being blown up because they rigged pagers to explode. Just psychopathic stuff like that. You're seeing this happen. And you're seeing conservative Christians defend it by comparing it to Old Testament violence. They're saying, well, actually, killing children en masse isn't, strictly speaking, objectively wrong, because God commanded Joshua and Israel to do it against the people of Jericho, the people of Canaan in the Old Testament. God said to kill all the women and children and show them no mercy. So why can't Israel today, of course, not that the state of Israel is comparable to the people of God in the Old Testament. That's a pretty big leap there, but let's just go with it for the sake of argument. Why can't Israel do equivalent things today against people who are also in their land? Now, when I'm starting to see this happen, what it did for me was it forced me to have to deal head on with an issue that had bugged me for as long as I've been a Christian, or longer than I've been a Christian, really, which is the problem of Old Testament violence. So you're seeing, what I'm saying is things like this are forcing me to confront issues that I had essentially put to the back of my mind and sort of said, I'll deal with that later. And it forced me to confront them. A lot of people have been acting like some of my recent live videos, it's like I've changed on something. that's actually not what's happened. I haven't changed. I just didn't talk about that issue. Or maybe I did at a few, like I may have said an off-the-cuff thing, which was my sort of go-to answer for now. But those issues I did always have in the back of my mind as saying, I really should think about this more. And with the Old Testament violence issue, that was an issue that's always bothered me. And so I had to confront it and deal with it in the context of all these other things I'm trying to sort out. And I then turned to the early church fathers. So that leads me to my studies that have taken place over the past 2 years that have impacted my thinking. The big one is that over the last 2 years, I have very, very deeply read the early church fathers. Now, everyone on YouTube loves to say they read the early church fathers, right? It's the big thing. All these content creators, you got to have a icon on the wall behind you. You got to like pay lip service to the early church. And it's just, this is part of my disillusionment of YouTube. It's so fake, right? Because it just so happens that if you're Roman Catholic, you believe that all of the early church fathers believed in the Vatican I type papacy. Yeah, totally. They all did. Yeah. Sure, okay. And if you're Eastern Orthodox, it just so happens that you think that all of the early church fathers were bowing before images and kissing icons and lighting incense before icons and falling prostrate before them and praying to Mary. And they were all doing that stuff. Yeah, oh, totally. From the early 2nd century, totally. They were all doing that. Yeah. Okay, and if you're a Reformed Baptist, you just so happen to think that all the early church fathers were Reformed Baptists. They turned up to church, they all wore a suit and tie, and they didn't baptize any of their children, and they were all Calvinists. All right, it's insane. It's insane. I knew enough about it. It's not like I hadn't read the church fathers before these 2 years, but I'd certainly read enough to know that they're not really like anyone alive today, frankly. And I do still think that if they're closest to a certain tradition, it is Anglicanism, okay? Because we do have the clearly high sacramentology that they have. We do have the priesthood and the episcopate and things. We do have liturgy and all that, but we also don't have the bizarre accretions like praying to saints, like idolatry towards images, and all that kind of stuff. So I'm getting into the early church fathers, and I decided I'm just going to read them really deeply. I read the Apostolic Fathers set probably 3 or 4 times, and I'm reading, of course, Justin Martyr, Tertullian, Hippolytus. I'm reading Origen, Clement of Alexandria, and then moving into fathers in the 4th century that I hadn't read in it as much, like the Cappadocians, particularly Gregory of Nyssa, and then also reading Maximus the Confessor. So I'm reading them, and what shocked me was just a lot of things, really, but it does change your thinking because you see the things about Christianity that they put the most emphasis on and things they didn't put as much emphasis on. These guys weren't so bothered by questions that seem to be front and center today. For them, it didn't matter so much. They were more focused on other things. And a lot of those things are things I already agreed with. Like, so for instance, I put out a video called The Early Church Was Socialists. Not Marxists. They didn't believe in state socialism, but yes, they did believe that the early church should voluntarily share money, give according to everyone's ability, each receive according to their need, and they didn't believe in private property in a capitalist sense. I already knew that. I already believed in that. But when you're reading the early church, you're seeing how central that is to them. This is really, really important to them. As in, that's like part of being a Christian. That's part of the Christian message. It's like part and parcel with it. And so when I'm seeing that, it's going, well, maybe I should talk about that issue then, rather than kind of just like leave it aside and not talk about it publicly, because I know that there's all these American Republican Christians who are going to act like that's virtually apostasy. In fact, I had someone, a friend of mine who I respected a lot, say that I should at least have the decency to apostatize. He said that in response to the socialism video. So he said, I think based on the New Testament and early church teachings that Christianity is socialist, not Marxist, not state socialism. And he says, oh, well, you should apostatize then. And this is what we're seeing. And you think when someone treats you that way, do you think you're going to want to listen to them? So anyway, it's going, okay, maybe I should talk about that kind of stuff more. But you're also seeing with the early church is that they are very speculative about a lot of things, and they're very open to disagree about a number of things. And yes, when you're reading Clement of Alexandria, Origen, Gregory of Nyssa, and Maximus the Confessor, you're seeing that their beliefs about eschatology isn't exactly in line with how the mainstream of conservative Christianity sees it. And that even people in the early church who didn't have that perspective weren't bothered by it. And of course, I'm also encountering, and I've already talked about this in my Theology Over Drinks video, you're encountering stuff like how actually they weren't dispensationalists, but they did have a belief that the end times does have a lot to do with the third temple in Jerusalem. It does have a lot to do with the Jews returning to the promised land and that kind of stuff. If you want to get into that, I've already put out 3 videos, Theology of Drinks videos about that stuff. Okay, so reading the early church is changing my perspective. And what I'm doing is I'm reading the early church at the same time as I'm reading the New Testament over and over and over again. And so you're seeing the New Testament in a new light. If you read the New Testament at the same time as you're reading the Apostolic Fathers, which I encourage, you'll see the way that you'll see what they're emphasizing the most. And you're starting to notice that things that might be very important to you theologically just aren't really showing up much. That it's not really that central to them. But things that are very central to them are things that maybe you don't even really care about or think about or frankly disagree about. Like divorce and remarriage, as an example. In the New Testament, the early church fathers, it's an important Christian belief that marriage is permanent and that you can't remarry after divorce. That just is a objective fact when it comes to early church. I think it's true of the Bible, but a lot of people disagree because they misread a few verses. But you're seeing things like that, but also caring for the poor, sharing wealth, and pacifism, radical love, radical compassion, radical forgiveness. You're seeing that stuff take place. And then as I'm doing that, I'm comparing it to the direction that the Christian right is moving in, where you've got people talking about, we need to rediscover the virtue of hatred. And you see people go, loving your enemies sometimes means destroying them and crushing them into dust. And you're thinking, okay. And you're reading the early church who are pacifists, and then you're seeing Christian pastors going on about my God-given right to carry arms. And you're seeing Joel Webbins say, all these people who are going to be no longer on welfare, they're going to be rioting in the streets. Next time I go grocery shopping, I'm going to bring along my gun. You're like, okay. You're seeing, all right, there's a bit of a difference here between authentic, original New Testament, early church Christianity and whatever the heck the Christian right is going on about these days. And there are vast disagreements. And so as someone who's conservative on issues like sexuality, on like the Bible being authoritative and so on and so forth, I kind of trend in the direction of the Christian right. But then you're actually seeing that these guys are just as, maybe not just as, but they are also disobedient to Jesus like the liberals are, right? Because they see Jesus say, you've heard it said you can hate your enemies, but I say love them. And they come away still hating their enemies. And they go, well, the Old Testament said I could hate them. Sure, but Jesus says that even though you've heard that, he says you should love them. And then they do all these ridiculous mental gymnastics on par, literally on par, with what people who support homosexuality do, where they say, oh, well, that was actually just referring to, prostitution or pedophilia or something. Or what people who favor women's ordination do, where they're like, oh, Paul was just talking to this church in this context. These guys are like, well, when Jesus says you shouldn't hate your enemies and you should love them, what does he mean by love your enemies? Well, loving your enemies can sometimes look like destroying them and killing them. Loving your enemies can sometimes look like what Israel is doing to the people of Gaza. That's not incongruous with what Jesus is saying at all. Blowing up children en masse. That's not hatred of your enemies. It's just insane. It's moral insanity. And I'm seeing this a lot. I'm sure you guys have too. You see on Twitter and Facebook, all these people do this. And you're just thinking, you don't care about what Jesus says either. You don't care what he says either. He's clearly a pacifist. He says turn the other cheek. And you get people who make up these ridiculous ideas. Or when Jesus said turn the other cheek, what he really meant was like you should show defiance because it's like their right hand. He's saying, don't you slap me with your right hand. You slap me with your left hand. Like, it's just ridiculous. That's not what he's saying. It's clearly about non-retaliation and non-violence. Same with divorce and remarriage. He says, whoever marries another after he divorces his wife commits adultery. And they go, oh, no, he didn't mean that. He didn't mean that. And so they will go ahead and say rightly that people in same-sex relationships are in terrible sin. They've got, like, they're on their third wife and, oh, that's just fine. It's hypocrisy. This is what's going on. I'm seeing widespread hypocrisy where everyone, in the end of the day, just picks and chooses the things they like. Acts 2 and 4 is clearly socialist. They ignore it. Jesus is clearly a pacifist. He's clearly in favor of radical forgiveness and compassion. He's clearly not positive entirely about the Old Testament law. He breaks it openly in multiple places, and he directly contradicts it. Paul has some shocking things to say about the Old Testament law. That goes against a fundamentalist kind of view of it all, and so they just ignore it, or they obfuscate it, or they just make up ridiculous nonsense about it. And I'm seeing this happen. But one really helpful way of getting out of this is when you read the early church, because now there's sort of nowhere to run, because they're saying these things, in fact, in many cases, more clearly than the New Testament. They're like, no. Remarriage after divorce is always wrong. They're saying, no, there is no private property and we really should be giving up everything for those in need. And now you can't escape. And now you're seeing what's really important. So this is impacting my thinking a lot as well. And this has been reflected in my recent live videos. Okay, and then I think another thing in my studies that has impacted my thinking is the discovery of the writings of George MacDonald. So George MacDonald, for those who don't know, he's a 19th century theologian. C.S. Lewis said that George MacDonald was his master. He said that George MacDonald, of all people who ever lived outside the New Testament, is the one who came the closest to Jesus Christ and to the mind of Christ. He says that George MacDonald's collection of sermons, he owes a greater debt to that book than he does to any other book. And I decided to read MacDonald, and yeah, it was life-changing. It's astonishing. I don't agree with everything MacDonald believed and taught, but even the things I disagree with him on are convicting, are compelling. It forces you to think things through. It forces you to ask deep questions of yourself and see so many things in a different perspective. So reading him was very powerful as well. That's why I've got a photo of him here in my room, of just a great guy. So reading him changed things for me as well. Okay, so this is all happening. And so the last thing to talk about then is just what this has led to in my mind. And it is just, it shouldn't be exaggerated. I'm still an Anglican. I still believe in the 39 Articles, and all that kind of stuff. But it has led to me a shifting of the priorities, a shifting of what I want my mission on YouTube to be. It's not all about denominations. Maybe my goal on YouTube shouldn't be just making people become Anglican. Maybe there is something wrong with every video you put up being, why the Roman Catholics are wrong about this. Maybe there's more important things to talk about. Maybe we should talk about those things as well. Or far more when we talk about, why sola scriptura doesn't create problems for the canon. I mean, I put out a video about exactly that. So don't think I'm being mean. I'm like criticizing myself. It's just there's other things to talk about too. Why does God allow suffering? Why does God allow children to die of leukemia? What's going to happen to those children? What's going to happen to the children in Gaza who are being blown to pieces in front of their crying, wailing mothers? Why has any of this happened? How is it going to get wrapped up? Okay, there's questions like that. I'm taking a funeral. There's people I know who are dying. I've got people who are suffering in many ways. I'm seeing the hypocrisy of the conservatives. I'm seeing the early church fathers had a lot of views that maybe you might be surprised they actually held to, so on and so forth. I'm thinking about all these things, and it has changed my thinking. So one of them is, the problem of suffering. This has been something I struggled with for 14 years. It was a big reason why I stopped being a Christian in my teens. I've never been comfortable with the answers that are usually given to it. When I became a Christian, it was because I came to believe that I don't need to know why he allows suffering, which is an opinion I still hold to and taught in my videos on suffering. But I've still been uncomfortable about how can he be loving in a definable and understandable way, despite all of the suffering that he allows or permits or, if not, causes. And honestly, I've had my suspicions for about 6 years now. Like 6 years. I think that might be as long as I've had a YouTube channel. So again, a lot of people think I've changed my mind on all this stuff recently. I've had my suspicions for about 6 years of what the logical conclusion is to God being all-powerful and all-loving. All right, I've long suspected what the final outcome, not of this age, not even necessarily of the next age, but possibly of the age or ages after that, must be if God loves all people, desires that all people be saved, and is also omnipotent and all-powerful and can do whatever he wants. I've had suspicions about that for a long time, but I put them to the back of my mind, and they've been safely there at the back of my mind, safely in the freezer, waiting for the day that I decide to start thinking about it properly. But over the past 2 years, for various reasons, a lot of which I've already talked about, I had to grapple with those questions more and the problem of suffering. And so that has led to that series I did called Defending Christianity. And I've come to a place where I'm comfortable with the answers, where I'm comfortable. Sorry, I should say I'm comfortable with what I would say to those questions. I don't answer them all. I don't know why he allows suffering. But you've seen those videos. That is the result of all these sort of things that have happened over the past couple of years. And then these denominational differences that I've just become so tired of, reading the early church, reading the New Testament many, many times with fresh eyes. And it helps that I read it in Greek and actually translating it into English myself and that sort of thing has also led me to reevaluating the priorities of Christianity. What is Christianity in terms of its key principles? And that's led to this new series. I've already put out 2 videos in that so far of what have I called it? Forgotten Christianity. Okay, so this is just some of the background to some of what I've been doing online. I've been talking for a lot longer than I planned to. I hope this doesn't come across as vain or self-interested, but I actually do think it's important for people on YouTube to make these sort of videos, because if I didn't talk about any of this, you wouldn't have known about any of this. And so you might be wondering, why does he think that? And it can lead to the false impression that we only believe what we do purely for intellectual reasons. And that is incorrect. A lot of it is life experience. And I guess I'll close with this. I think one issue with ecclesial anxiety, with a lot of these young men, particularly young men, becoming paralyzed in their thoughts, terrified of this evil God who's going to torture them forever because they're in a Lutheran church rather than a Roman Catholic one. A lot of the problem is that they get stuck in their head and they get stuck in like the realm of ideas. And they become divorced from reality. You know, they personally know Christians who are they might be a Baptist or, non-denominational evangelical, but they are clearly Christians who clearly love Jesus, who are good people, who are forgiving, who are generous, who are kind, who are compassionate, who are devout. They're seeing this. They're a better Christian than anyone else they know. But because of some dork on YouTube who's always like, Protestants are going to hell because they believe in the heresy of sola scriptura. They start to think that these people are going to go to hell. Right? You see, you get into a head, you forget about actual experience, actual life, actual reality, and then you actually end up just becoming an idiot. Sorry, but you just become an idiot. That's what happens to you. You end up believing in things that are ridiculous, that are completely ridiculous. Like you think that someone like that, I know people like this. There are people I know who are wrong about a lot of theological issues, and they just don't really know they don't know these higher end stuff, right? If you said to them the essence, what do you believe about the essence energies distinction? They would look at you like you just spoke to them in Arabic, right? But they are far better Christians than I am, than anyone else I know is. And it is idiotic to say that, well, they're bound for eternal torture because of stuff like that. Like they're wrong about, the filioque. Whereas someone who's correct about all that stuff, they properly distinguish between God's essence and energies, and they don't believe in the filioque. But like doesn't bear any fruit. It's like barely living according to Christian ethics, Oh, they're all good because of this. It's stupid. It's stupid. And I'm trying to push back on that. One of the ways I'm pushing back on is saying life experience matters. And if you don't have any life experience, you might be thinking, oh, well, he knows a lot of Christians. He's been through a lot of, things in life. I don't know anything like that. My whole Christian faith is basically just bound to watching YouTube videos. Then you need to get out and make friends and live life and experience life and see what beliefs do to people. See who's living out the Christian walk, that you should be very influenced by actual people you actually know who are actually godly, who are actually good people, who are actually obeying Jesus. And not by a talking head on YouTube who you don't even know who they are. You probably don't know anything about them. You can't even verify if they even go to church. And you're only being influenced by them. Someone who's just being like, sola scriptura, the papacy, praying to saints, the intercession of Jesus, Mary is a co-mediator. You're being influenced by them, not by people you know. It's wrong. Don't do that. Okay, so I think that's kind of like the point of why I'm making this video. All that's to say, I have changed my perspective, I might say, without really changing my beliefs much. Again, I'm still an Anglican, still very comfortable with that, still believe in the 39 Articles, and I still believe in sola fide and all that kind of thing, right? There's no videos I've put out in a long time that I watch now and disagree with, but my shifting in perspective is just sort of the priorities, how God is being portrayed, which I'm very mindful of now. People, you talk all day long about the real presence, sola scriptura, the episcopacy, apostolic succession. And you think that you're not talking about God, you're talking about these issues. All of that, the way you're talking about it, the implications you're making is portraying God in a certain way. And it's suggesting that God, is cruel, he's testing you, that, you're on your way to your baptism and you die in a car crash, you didn't get to be baptized, and God's like, oh, too bad. I'm going to torture you forever now, you piece of crap, because you didn't get baptized. Oh. Yeah, it's just, this is like, you got to be mindful of how you portray God, I think. So I'm seeing that. And yeah, I've changed my beliefs about some things, but they happen to be things I didn't really talk about before anyway. So, So that's that. That's the journey. Now I'm a priest, and it's a very humbling calling. It's terrifying. There's couples who, they get divorced in their 60s. you might be a certain way now. What are you going to be like in 50 years' time? I'm 29. Let's say I've got another, 40 years to go. What am I going to be like in 40 years? So the scary thing is staying the course, finishing the race well, ending your ministry well. So that's humbling. And you can only do it by the grace of God. So I pray, and I ask you to pray, that God will ensure they do finish the race, they do have a fruitful ministry. And so stay tuned for more videos that'll be coming out. I hope this has been helpful, encouraging, useful. I just felt compelled to say these things. I hope it's been helpful somehow. And pray for me. Please pray for my church, St. Timothy's. And for those watching, God bless you. See ya.